Hello, my name is Craig Shallenhammer, and I'm going to introduce you to a tool that I wrote to help us explore the relationship between the total time and response time. So I'm going to start by explaining the graphs here at the very bottom. On the bottom left is the classic response time curve. It depicts the relationship between workload intensity and what's called response time. Now, the workload intensity is commonly called the arrival rate. And it is, for example, you could say that 500 transactions enter the system per minute. So this is work per time. The response time is how long it takes to process one single piece of work. So for example, if the arrival rate is 3.5 transactions per second, at that arrival rate, on average, the transaction will take, the time to process one transaction will take around 3 seconds. So the response time curve relates work with time. And in particular, the response time is how long it takes to process one single piece of work. Now, on the right, in contrast, is the total time or the bar chart. We see something very similar to this on typical Oracle performance monitors. When we look at all the accumulated time over some interval, let's say an hour or maybe 10 minutes. Um, what and so let me just show you, when we go back, when we set the wall time to like 0 at the beginning of the hour, no time has accumulated. But as time increases, as the clock is moving, there is now accumulating time right here. Now I want to explain the difference between the green and the red. The green time represents the accumulated service time. This is how long it takes to service one piece of work. And how this relates to the response time curve is the service time, or the green color time, is constant regardless of the arrival rate, and it's all this time down here. But at some workload intensity, let's say the CPU subsystem just can't handle that much workload, and processes have to queue. And that's called the queue time, and that's what happens when we enter in what's called the elbow of the curve. So at this arrival rate, 3.5, you can see this is about how much queue time we have. And the queue time, or the accumulated queue time, is what's the red time right here. So you can see at this particular workload intensity, over time, there's going to be a bunch of queue time, and that's why we have so much red in the big bar right here. So we're approaching 1 hour, assuming an hour has 3,600 minutes right here. And you can see we have a bunch of service time that's accumulated and also a bunch of queue time that has accumulated. Now, let's say you look at this from an Oracle perspective and we say, hey, let's figure out a way to reduce the total time. Let's focus on reducing this total queue time. Well, one way to do that is to reduce the arrival rate. See, if we reduce the arrival rate, there's not going to be as much queuing. And so, and I'm not going to talk about the ways that you can do that, but let's say we did do that. Now, even after an hour, there is no queue time, it's only service time. And even if we go back to, let's say, we reset the wall clock to 0, if we let that go forward for an entire hour, notice how little time accumulates. That's because it doesn't take very long to process each piece of work. And even after a full hour, it's all green. But let's say in the afternoon, the arrival rate starts to increase because there's a lot of people using the system, and transactions have to queue. We got this queue time. Well, then after an hour, there is a lot of queue time. I'm just going to let this run for a second right here. You can see that we get an accumulation both of increasing service time, right, and we get an accumulation of a bunch of queue time. And so that big bar is going to get pretty big by the end of the hour. And so that's how this relates to those performance monitors that we see that have the big bar. So the key here is understanding that the response time relates to one single piece of work at a given workload intensity. And this total time, or the big bar, is the accumulation of all the service time and all the queue time for all the transactions that have arrived in the system over some interval, which in this case would be about an hour, let's say 3,600 seconds. So I hope you enjoy messing with this tool. It's a lot of fun. I think you can learn a lot and have a good time at the same time. Thanks for watching.